Hello and welcome to this video that is exploring the next chapter of the story. My name is Pastor Scott Dalen, pastor from an ELCA congregation in Southwest Iowa, and I'm preparing these videos as a companion every week to go along with a study that my congregation is doing of the story, which kind of looks like that. It is a condensed biblical narrative put out by Zondervan and written by a guy named Randy Frazee. And every week we are exploring a chapter as we look at the overarching narrative of what God has been up to throughout the story of our present reality, and that comes, of course, from the Bible. This particular week we studied chapter 3, which focuses on the story of Joseph and his time in Egypt as he goes from it's called Joseph from slave to deputy pharaoh, and we looked at his particular story as it falls towards the end of the book of Genesis. Now, this particular story highlights how the Israelite people ended up moving from Cana, which is in the region of present-day Israel, over to Egypt, which is where things pick up at the beginning of the book of Exodus, as they've been there for 400 years and they are enslaved by the Egyptian people, and so that's where Exodus will pick up, and that will actually be our next chapter that we look at, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. So we are looking now at how did the people end up there. As the story picks up, we find that we've first off been looking at the patriarchs. That was our previous video from a week ago, starting with Abraham, where God made the covenant with Abraham, and then moving through his son Isaac, and then moving through his son Jacob, whose name is later changed to Israel by God, and along with his sons, and that's where things pick up. Now, Jacob is the 11th of 12 sons of Jacob. I think I said that wrong. Joseph is the 11th of 12 sons of Jacob. He's the oldest son of his beloved wife Rachel. Jacob had two wives and then two maidservants of his wives, who he also had kids with, very common occurrence at the time. So he had 12 kids throughout these four women. But Joseph was the first son from Rachel, his beloved wife. So Joseph, even though he's number 11 in line, is the favored son of Jacob. Perhaps you've heard of his coat of many colors, or Andrew Lloyd Webber created not the theme song, the Broadway play of or musical of Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Now, the reason that he has this long coat of many colors, it actually shows that he is the favored son. He is the heir. He doesn't do any work while his brothers are off taking care of the flocks of their father. He is at home, basically being pampered because he's the favored son. Now, some background to us. Joseph is given the ability to interpret dreams and also has dreams, or divination, perhaps it's called. He's a seer, if you want to call it that. Many different names for it. But God gives him the ability to have dreams and to interpret dreams. And coming into chapter 3, he's had a couple of dreams in which he recognizes that it's his brothers and his family bowing down to him. Now, this is definitely foreshadowing, something that will come later in the chapter. But being the typical teenage kid, perhaps not even meaning poorly, but he goes off and he tells his brothers, well, that doesn't sit real well with them. So they don't like him. He's the annoying younger brother. He's the favored son who's taking their inheritance away. So they're not big fans of little brother Joseph. And that's kind of what has happened leading up to this. So then we see that Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers, and he travels and finds them. And they see him coming for a ways away, and they say, hey, here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him. Let's just kill him. Lovely brothers. You got some sibling angst going on there. But we talked quite a bit about that in our study, and how First, they say they're going to kill him. Then Reuben, who is the oldest of the 12 brothers, says, "No, let's not kill him. That's not the smartest idea. Let's just throw him in a well and teach him a lesson that way," meaning to come back and get him and take him back to dad. Now, the reason for this, Reuben's the oldest. He is the one who's responsible for the rest of his brothers, so he knows if anything happens to Joseph, it's going to be on him. Lo and behold, though, that's exactly what happens. And one of the other brothers, Judah, says, "Hey, he's down in the well. Here comes some Ishmaelites. Let's sell him as a slave, and let's make some money off this, and then we'll still go through with our plan to tell Daddy was dead." So that's what they do. And because of this, Joseph is hauled off to Egypt, where he is sold into the house of Potiphar, who's the captain of Pharaoh's guards. And he quickly raises up through the ranks within Potiphar's house. He's still a slave, but God is with him and blesses everything that he does. He's got some amazing administrative skills, apparently. And so Joseph rises up through Potiphar's house. He's basically second in command only to Potiphar. Potiphar doesn't have to worry about anything because he knows that Joseph's got it. Joseph, on the other hand, though, is apparently kind of a looker, and Potiphar's wife takes a liking to him and wants to sleep with him, and tries and tries and tries, and he always says no. And then one day she gets a hold of his cloak and tries again, and he just kind of tears out of his cloak and runs away. And so she uses that to accuse him of attempted rape. And because of this, Joseph is thrown into prison. And he's in there for quite a while. We see a repeat. Same sort of thing happens. God is with him in prison, and he raises up through the ranks of the prison. And the warden discovers that, hey, this guy can take care of everything here. So he's like the ultimate trustee, and takes care of the prison. And once again, we see this repeat, that the person in charge of the place where Joseph is doesn't even have to worry about it because he's handling it. The story then kind of glosses over a portion of while they're in jail, that two members of Pharaoh's court or servants, high-ranking servants of his, are also thrown in jail, and they have dreams. And Joseph is able to interpret them and says to one of them, "Your dream means that you're going to be executed." Lo and behold, that happens. The other one says, "Your dream means that you're going to be pardoned, you're going to be reinstated, and you'll go back working for Pharaoh in the court again." And that happens. And he says, "When you go back, remember me so that I can get out of prison." Well, the guy goes back, and 2 years passes. He forgets all about Joseph, and until Pharaoh starts having dreams that no one can interpret. And then he remembers, oh, there was this guy in prison with me who he could interpret dreams. Let's go get him. So they do. Now, granted, several years have passed that Joseph's been in jail. But God's been with him the whole time. Now he comes into Pharaoh's court and to Pharaoh and interprets his dreams for them. Says, "Your dreams indicate that there's going to be this famine coming, and because of that, this is what you should do. First, there's going to be 7 good years followed by 7 years of famine. So you need to store up food to provide not only for you but for all nations." And so lo and behold, that happens, and Pharaoh says, "Well, you are wise and you have this plan. You are the one who should execute it." So now all of a sudden, Joseph is made second in command over all of Egypt, and so he's gone from a slave, or from a slave sold to a traveling caravan, now to second in command only under Pharaoh to all of Egypt. And so we talked quite a bit about that threefold situation. And we talked a lot about why does God continue to allow this bad stuff to happen to Joseph? And a lot of the conversation centered around, did God cause this to happen, or did God use what was happening for the good? We talked more and more and more, and Joseph seems to be of the mentality that God uses what's happening. The jealousy of his brothers that leads to him being sold as a slave, the lust of Potiphar's wife that leads to him being put in prison, the forgetfulness of the cupbearer that keeps him there, and then the famine that's coming. All of these things God uses for the purpose of not only saving the Israelite people, though this one rather large, but still this one family that will eventually expand throughout to be this great nation, but also to hearkening back to what we heard about Abraham, that all nations will be blessed that happens, and during this time, all the nations around that known world, around that region of the world of Africa and the Middle East and Europe as they occurred, they all came to Egypt to get food during this famine, and so all the nations were being blessed even through Joseph there. That was quite a bit of the conversation that we had centered around that story, or that particular portion of the story. Now, moving on from there, during the time of the famine, this is when Joseph's brothers, or older brothers, his younger brother doesn't come, but his older brothers travel from Canaan down to Egypt to buy grain. Joseph, of course, recognizes them immediately. They don't recognize him because imagine that's the last place they expected to find him, if at all. They probably thought he was dead by this point because quite a few years have gone by. And so they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. To them, he's just an Egyptian, so they have no idea that it's him. And so within the group, we kind of talked about this story. It's very back and forth. Joseph really kind of puts his brothers through the ringer. He accuses them of being spies. He throws them in prison. Then he tells them, you know what, I'm going to let you go, but I want to know about this brother that you said you had and your father. Send them back. Then I'll believe that you're not a spy. I'm going to keep one of you in prison, and he gives them their silver or their money back, and also puts some articles in their bags like they've stolen it, and he sends his guards after them, throws them in prison again. It's a very back and forth, and Joseph is really kind of putting him through the ringer. So we talked about that as well. Is Joseph, is he still mad at his brothers? Is he still blaming them? Is that why he's doing all of this? Is he or is he trying to find out, have they changed? Have they grown up? Has their hearts been changed by the time that has passed? Are they truly repentant? And we see aspects of that within the story. And in particular, Judah, whose idea it was to sell him to the Ishmaelites in the first place, he finally kind of comes forward and almost very repentant of what's happened in the situation that they're finding themselves in. Because of that, he finally reveals himself to his brothers and says, it's me, don't worry, you intended this for evil, but God has used it for the good, which, if you remember, we talked about that just a moment ago of did God use it or did God cause these things to happen? Well, God used it. That seems to be Joseph's stance. From there, he says, go and get our father, bring him here, bring his whole household here, and I will take care of you. And from that happens, and they settle in the land of Goshen, which is just outside the Nile River Delta on the northern end of Egypt as it's approaching the Mediterranean Sea. It's kind of between the Nile Delta and the Red Sea, which is up there. So they settle there. And this kind of wraps up the book of Genesis. And so Joseph is reconciled with his brothers. He is reunited with his father, and his father lives out the rest of his days in Egypt, dies there, but makes them promise, don't bury me here. One day, take me back and bury me in the land of my forefathers. And Joseph kind of says the same thing. So that's kind of what has been going on with this chapter, and we talk quite a bit about how when hard things happen in life, when horrible things happen, it's only through hindsight that we can look back and see, okay, this was really, really hard, but good things came out of it. And we talked some about that as well, of does God cause these things to happen? We don't think so, but God can use them to teach us, to bring other situations forward. But it's really only with the passage of time that we can kind of begin to see that. So that's what went on in our discussion. That's kind of what's happening in this. This got a little bit longer than I normally like to have happen, but that's kind of where we were at with it. So if you have any thoughts or questions or comments that you want to add after reading chapter 3 of the story, by all means share those with us either here in this video or on Facebook, where it will be posted as well, and we can continue the conversation. Otherwise, I want you to have a great couple of weeks. Actually, we're going to be on break now for vacation for a couple of weeks, so we'll be back in about 3 weeks with a new video. So we'll catch you next time. God bless.